Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. Jim Brett here at the New England Council, and I hope everyone is having a great summer so far. It's hard to believe that we are already in the second half of 2021. We have several other virtual programs planned in the next couple of weeks that I wanted to remind you of. Tomorrow, we're looking forward to a presentation on an incredible online platform called InternX. It's an initiative of the Fund 2 Foundation. InternX connects employers with students from underrepresented backgrounds to provide internships in the STEM fields. And we're excited to be partnering with InternX to recruit new employers and hopefully some newer higher ed partners for them as well. And next week on July 22nd, we will host the fourth and the final program in our Investing in Infrastructure series. And this time, we're going to be looking at the broadband and the 5G infrastructure investments needed to support innovation in our region and to help close the digital divide. And speaking of infrastructure, we are fortunate to be joined today by Senator Shaheen, who's been a very key player in ongoing efforts in Congress to advance a bipartisan infrastructure investment package. Senator Shaheen is serving her third term representing New Hampshire in the United States Senate. And she previously served as the Granite State's governor for 6 years. She serves on several key committees that play a role in shaping federal investment in our region and in advancing policies that support economic growth. The senator is a senior member of the powerful Appropriations Committee, where she chairs the Commerce, the Justice, and the Science Committee. She also serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Small Business Committee. And as I mentioned, in recent weeks, she's been one of a bipartisan group of 10 United States senators who has worked together to craft a $1.2 trillion infrastructure investment framework that has won the support of the White House, as well as members on both sides of the aisle. Our region, our nation, is fortunate to have such a tremendous leader advocating for us on Capitol Hill. New England Council is fortunate that she could take time today to update us on the ongoing work in Congress to advance that bipartisan package. One quick note before I hand it over to the senator: we will be taking live questions from the audience today. So at any point during the program, you have a question for the senator, please use the Q&A feature to submit it, and we'll get to as many as we can. Again, thank you all for joining us this morning. And now I'm pleased to hand it over to my good friend, the Honorable United States Senator, Jeanne Shaheen.
Okay, technical difficulties there.
That's okay. That's why we need the 5G infrastructure.
Yeah, that's why we need to stop Zooming.
I hear you. I'm with you, Senator. So, you want to give us an update, Senator, on all of these meetings that you've had in the Mansfield room last night and all other meetings in the last couple of days?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you all. I know we have lots of people who are tuned in, and it's really nice to see everyone at a time that is much more encouraging than last mid-December when I last talked with everyone from the New England Council. And so much has happened since then. Fortunately, the COVID numbers have gotten better. We've seen the January 6th insurrection, the impeachment of Donald Trump, the passage of the American Rescue Plan, the inauguration of Joe Biden. A lot has happened since I last spoke with all of you, and I'm happy that the economy has gotten better, that at least in New England, we have addressed COVID in a way that allows businesses to open up, people to move more freely, to be without masks. And obviously, we still have a challenge with getting all of the country vaccinated and getting those people who are not vaccinated, because that's the way we really defeat this virus. And that's still, I think, one of our top priorities in this country. Another priority, and one of the things that we've continued to work on since December, I think when I spoke with you all last, we were just putting to bed another package of COVID assistance. And we'd had a bipartisan group that had been working on that for a couple of months, and we had just announced it, and we're looking forward to getting that package to the floor. Well, that bipartisan group has continued to meet, at least a number of us have. And so when the president talked about the need to pass an infrastructure package, we got together and said, well, let's see if we can't put together something that's bipartisan. So 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans worked for over a month to try and see if we could reach agreement. We did. You may have seen the White House, the president endorsed that agreement. It is $579 billion over 5 years in new money. That's the biggest investment we've ever made in infrastructure by about twice in this country. And it allows us to begin to be competitive with China, who was our biggest competitor, but also with Europe, with the other countries around the world that we need to be able to compete with. And so I'm excited about that. If you look at over 8 years, it's about $1.2 trillion, which gets close to what the president had been talking about. It includes significant funding for traditional infrastructure projects, for roads and bridges, for mass transit, for water and wastewater, including for PFAS, which is something that I have championed because we have seen a real need in New Hampshire and in other states across the country. It includes funding for broadband. If we do this the way we should, I think we should be able to connect almost every household in the country to broadband, which would be a huge step forward and provide opportunities in so many communities, particularly rural communities that haven't been able to benefit. It includes significant funding for electric vehicles, also for buses, low carbon buses, because that's a place where we need to, again, be able to make real progress. It includes funding for something we're calling resilience, which is to address the challenges mostly around climate change. And as we know, all of the states that have coasts, we understand the challenges that we're facing from climate change. It includes funding to address our energy needs, to upgrade the grid in this country, to cap methane coming out of wells, to really make some significant progress on climate change in the energy arena. So I think it's a very good package. It's not what everyone wanted. Certainly if I were writing the bill, I would have written it differently. But one of the things we know about legislation is that it's a compromise. And so I think this is a very important bipartisan compromise that says that we can work together to get something done. We now have 22 people, equally divided, Democrats and Republicans, who have endorsed this plan, who are continuing to work on the details. We hope to have legislative language by next week that will allow it to go to the floor. You also saw, I'm sure, that the president or the Senator Schumer and the Budget Committee announced an agreement on a budget resolution that is $3.5 trillion. I don't know much about what's in that because it hasn't been announced. I do know it addresses a lot of the investments that we know we need to make in people. We need to invest both in our infrastructure, but we also need to invest in people. And it includes support for things like childcare, for additional college assistance for people, for healthcare, an expansion of Medicare to cover things like hearing and eyesight and dental coverage. It includes family medical leave. So a lot of those investments, home and community-based services, which again is something that's very important as we look at our aging population in states like New Hampshire. But it is, I think, a package that the president is going to come and meet with Democrats today to talk to us about, and I expect we will learn more details today. But I think these investments are making a difference in our economy. We're seeing the country bounce back in ways that we are not seeing in other countries around the world. And I think that has a lot to do with our success in attacking the coronavirus, as well as our willingness to invest in ways that allow our businesses and families to get through this pandemic. So we obviously still have a lot to do. I could talk for the whole hour on the international situation. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee and Armed Services, and obviously there's been a lot of action there. But I want to stop now because I have to leave early for a hearing on the budget in Health and Human Services. So I want to be able to get to that on time, where I will see Boston's Mayor Marty Walsh, who is now the Secretary of Labor. So I look forward to that and to a chance to talk more about what we need to invest in this country to ensure that we're competitive.
Great. I know we only have a limited amount of time, Senator. Are you confident that we could do the bipartisan infrastructure bill by the August recess?
Well, I'm hopeful. You know, as you know, when we're talking about legislation and the vagaries of the floor and action on the floor, it's never clear how long that will take. But I think there is an intent to stay here until we get that done. So if that means delaying the August recess until we do that, I think that's probably what we need to do.
And is there any discussion at all about how to finance the 1.2 trillion? I mean, there's talk about maybe adding additional agents in the IRS and maybe some public-private partnership. Do you think that'll be enough revenue there to pay for the 1.2 trillion?
Well, we have a whole list of pay-fors for the infrastructure, the traditional infrastructure plan. We are now working on getting the CBO and OMB to give us cost estimates on what they think that will bring in terms of revenue, but our hope is to have that pretty well paid for.
Yeah. And
we're a little creative in our pay-fors, but
yeah,
you know, we need to be.
I mean, you mentioned last night the Senate, the Budget Committee. I think it was all 11 members voted for the $3.5 trillion budget. Do you think that plan, being as large as it is, even though it's not as large as Senator Bernie Sanders wanted, he wanted $6 trillion, and there were people like Joe Manchin who were saying, I can't go for anything over $2.5 trillion. Do you think that that large package might reduce your GOP support for the infrastructure bill, that they might just say on the other side, we're just spending too much, too fast, let's slow it down? I don't know if I could be committed to the infrastructure bill now.
Well, I hope not. I think as we were working on the infrastructure package, we had a lot of discussion about the fact that there was this other track going on to address the human investments, and that the president had made clear that he had a jobs plan and a families plan, and that he wanted to see both move forward. So I hope not. I think most of us who have worked on this infrastructure package are invested and believe it's an important way to invest in what we need to around infrastructure in this country. So will people be affected? I think there will be a strong effort to ensure that people don't feel like they can't support the infrastructure package because there's another piece of legislation. I mean, that's like saying, I'm not going to vote for, for any legislation if I don't like this one piece. And I don't think most people take that approach to legislation.
I know you have 5 Republicans supportive of the infrastructure bill led by, I think, Senator Portman and Susan Collins. Are you confident?
Actually, it's 11, Jim. We have 11 Republicans and 11 Democrats who have signed on to the framework and are supporting it and are working on the details of the legislative language at this point.
So you feel confident that they'll stay with you and you'll have your 60 votes?
I do.
Well, that's good to know. And then the other, the other issue is again, it's the revenue that some people are very concerned about, that they're saying, I love the framework. I love the idea that you've incorporated all this. I'm just a little concerned about how do we pay for it all? So again, are they talking about going after the capital gains tax on the $3.5 trillion agreement on the budget, from 21% to 28% capital gains, maybe doing, on the corporate tax, capital gains from 23% to 43%?
We haven't seen, I haven't seen what they're talking about in terms of paying for the budget agreement. I don't think that's been released yet. We know that the plan that the president offered would have increased taxes on high income individuals. It would have increased the tax rate for corporations. So I would assume that some of that might be in there, but what the details are, we haven't seen yet.
Yeah. And just being a member of the Appropriations Committee now, you have earmarks that have come.
Congressionally directed spending.
That's exactly right. I'm obviously, with that new term, tells me that some of your colleagues are not all that comfortable with the idea of the earmarks being returned. But tell me how you think it's going to pan out in your committee. Do you think it's really going to help getting both sides to work together on pieces of legislation now?
Well, I hope so. When I first got to the Senate, we had earmarks, and I feel like I'm in a better position to be able to judge what is important in New Hampshire based on what I'm hearing than the people who are in the administration might be, because they don't have the same kind of connections to states that each of us do as individual senators. There are also particular challenges in small states because of the way the formulas work, that there are projects that are very worthwhile that are not going to get funded because of those formulas. And so I think small states in particular really get the short end of the stick often. And these earmarks is a way to help really fund those very worthwhile projects. I will tell you that I think we've gotten requests for about 300 projects that total over $600 million in spending. So obviously we are not going to get all of those funded. And we are in the process of going through in our office and prioritizing the projects that we submit. There are very strict requirements for what can get funded and what isn't funded. And once we get those prioritized, they will be on our website. This is a transparent process. People will know what we're advocating for. And that has not been the case in the last period since 2010 when we ended congressionally directed spending. So I think this is a better way for things to work. There are a lot of areas where we don't, at this point, we're not allowing earmarks. One of those is with the defense budget. So I hope that this is going to be successful because I think it's important to a lot of parts of my state and other states where they can't get help for what they need.
Right. I know we're focused on infrastructure, but if I could just shift gears, just ask you about a topic you've been a tremendous leader on. That's the opiate epidemic. And I believe several years ago, you were a leader in passing that Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act.
Right.
And New England Council was very involved in it and supported and proud of it. But earlier this year, you again and your colleagues introduced another CARA 3.0 to provide additional resources. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the bill and the prospects of the bill passing in the Senate?
Well, it was to update the authorizations that are available for different programs within the substance use disorders, the whole range of programs that are available to address that. And a couple of the changes that I think are really important about that legislation are the increase in support for medication-assisted treatment, which we know works and ensuring that that is available is really important, as well as additional support for recovery services, because we know that substance use disorders are not a one-time illness, it's a chronic disease, and we need to treat it that way and understand that it's like diabetes or heart disease or any other chronic illness. It requires treatment for a long period of time. And so I think those both are very important. The other thing that I think is very important is that we expanded coverage for what can be considered as a need under these programs. So not just opioids, but also meth and cocaine. And I hope we can expand that even further, because what we see in New Hampshire is that the biggest areas of need, the highest percentage of people who come through the door in our hub and spoke system are people with alcohol issues. So making sure that we have those programs that can cover everybody who has a substance use disorder, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Just again, a reminder to the audience, if you have a question, just submit it using that Q&A tool. But Emily Heisig, who runs our DC office, she's on the line with us, and she's going to facilitate some live questions. Emily?
Yeah, we have a few. I'll start with one from one of our higher ed members. Senator, do you envision the final infrastructure package including funding for research facilities at institutions of higher education?
I do. I think that will be covered not just in the whatever comes out of this budget resolution, but also we've made a significant down payment with what we call the Endless Frontiers Act that we passed a month or so ago, that is designed to help us compete against China. And it makes significant investments, particularly in the National Science Foundation, which distributes that money to go to research institutions across the country. But I think it increases their budget from what is now about $10 to $12 billion a year to $50 billion in the Endless Frontiers Act. So there will be significant investments. Also, as we're looking at the appropriations process, we're also looking at investments in research. As we look at what we need to do in this country to stay competitive, we know that continuing investments in innovation, in research, in the work that our universities are doing is really critical. So ensuring that that continues, I think most people appreciate is important to our staying competitive.
Another on the infrastructure package, as Congress continues to consider infrastructure proposals and the COVID-19 pandemic begins to de-escalate, are there goals and opportunities specific to New Hampshire that can be achieved through thoughtful inclusion of technology, specifically fiber optics, in an infrastructure package?
Well, as I said, there is significant funding in this bipartisan package for expansion of broadband. Now, I think we've got to do it in a way that's more effective than we've done it. We had funding for broadband in the Recovery and Reinvestment Act and the ARA funding in 2009 after the financial meltdown. And I don't feel like we did a very good job with those dollars that were available to expand broadband at that time. I think we've got to be better than that this time. And I'm hoping that we can come to agreement on how those funds are going to get distributed, who's going to be the agency that does that, and make sure that it's not just the town centers or the city centers that have access to the internet, but that we can get it to the rural parts of the country that really are going to be left behind. One of the things we saw from the pandemic is just the increasing digital divide in this country, and what happens to those young people who don't have access to high-speed internet, what happens to communities that don't have access to broadband. They can't attract businesses to those communities. So this is something that we've really got to do, and we've got to do it better than we've done it in the past. And I have to say, I know that this will not make some of the people listening very happy, but we have some of the big players who are internet service providers who can't continue to have a monopoly in the market if we're going to get to all of the households that we need to get to.
Great. We have another question about the public transportation aspects of the infrastructure package. How do we move from talking about the dollar amount spent to the outcomes that will be created, ensuring that the funding is used wisely and on projects that generate the most benefit and create a sea change in how public transit is viewed and utilized in this country?
Well, I think that's part of the president's vision with trying to expand to electric vehicles. So not public transit per se, but as an effort to reduce emissions, which is one of the things we've got to do if we're going to address climate change. There are significant dollars in this proposal for Amtrak, for public transit. You know, bigger states have more of an issue with that. You do in Massachusetts than we do in New Hampshire, but it's important for us to try and encourage the use of mass transit where we can. But in order to do that, we've got to make sure that it's efficient. People are not going to ride on Amtrak if the trains don't run on time, and it takes longer to do that. So we've got to ensure that mass transit is operating efficiently. And for that, we have to rely on leadership. In New Hampshire, for example, we have a number of our major cities that have buses. That's the mass transit in those cities. And we rely on those cities to ensure that those buses are well taken care of, that they're running on time, that people are comfortable riding them, that they're safe. There's a significant piece in this infrastructure package that deals with safety. So I think we've got to look at a whole range of things, and that means not just the Secretary of Transportation. I think Secretary Buttigieg is doing a very good job, but it means that governors, mayors, directors of public transportation, CEOs, all have to weigh in and do a good job as well. And it's important for us as the public to encourage that, to urge that that happens. You know, it's not something that we can rely on everybody else to do. We've all got to participate in this.
Senator, do you have a couple of projects you'd like to see come from the infrastructure package for New Hampshire?
Well, I talked about PFAS. I think that's really important that we ensure that there's funding for communities to address PFAS, because that is becoming more of an issue. We became aware of it very early in New Hampshire because of the former Pease Air Force Base, where sadly it turned up in the water supply on the base that affected childcare centers and affected the water supply for the city of Portsmouth. We've also got a lot of homes where private wells have been affected. We've seen manufacturing enterprises. St. Gobain in Merrimack has had an issue with PFAS because of the process that they've used. So we've got to address this. It's a factor on over 600 military bases in this country. Virtually every airport has an issue. And if we don't address it now, it's only going to get worse. It's going to spread in the water supply and become more of an issue. So that's one that I'm very hopeful we will be able to get some funding that will help us. Another is broadband. As I say, you know, we've got parts of northern New Hampshire, the western part of the state, small towns where households can't get connected to broadband. And if they can, the speeds, the download and upload speeds are so slow that it doesn't allow them to benefit. So we've got to address that. If we're going to spread opportunities for everyone, then we've got to make sure that everyone has equal access.
Is there any support for housing in this infrastructure bill?
In the package that I have worked on, we don't have significant funds for housing. It's my understanding that there is funding for housing in the budget resolution. I haven't seen that. I would also point out that there was significant funding to help with rental assistance and mortgage assistance in the American Rescue Plan. And one of the things that I would urge people to do, those funds went to the community level, to the county level, and to the state level. And they are very flexible. So if someone has a project, if there are businesses that feel like they need help in a particular industry, for example, there should be funding available. And if you have a question about what might be available, contact our office, contact senators in Massachusetts, the representatives. Let us see if we can help figure out where the funds are, because there are a lot of, I was over in Cheshire County in New Hampshire last week, and the county is developing a plan. We had a roundtable with a number of representatives from the small towns in that area talking about their challenges with getting access to high-speed internet. And one of the things that came out of that discussion was the town saying, one of the things we really need is technical assistance to help us as we're trying to figure out how we get access to internet, how we connect with the internet service providers, how we do this. And so the county administrator was there with us, and he said, boy, that would be a really good use of some of those American Rescue Plan dollars, because this is related to COVID. This is something that we need to do in response. And so it's that kind of creativity that I hope is happening all over the country.
Do we have other questions, Emily?
We have one that is not infrastructure related, but another big priority for the council this year. So I'll throw it in the mix. Senator, could you give us an update on the legislation to double the Pell Grant for college students?
Well, I think there is separate legislation. I also think this is one of the things that's going to be in the budget resolution. It will be very important as we look at the challenges that young people are facing. The amount of student loan debt is really significant. I also think as we're looking at opportunities for young people, there is a growing understanding that for a lot of young people, a 4-year degree is something that they want. It's really important, and they can afford it, and we should make sure they're successful at it. We're also learning that there are a lot of young people who may not want that. That may not be the best way for them to plan for their futures. And so looking at community colleges, looking at certificate programs, apprenticeships, looking at the trades and how we get more young people into the trades, I think is also very important. Last week, I was at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kath Hicks, and one of the things they talked about at the shipyard was the need they have for tradespeople, for welders in particular, and the partnerships they have with community colleges. In New Hampshire, they partner with the White Mountains Community College up in Berlin to get students from their welding program to come down to the shipyard, because they get a head start at the community college, and then they come down and they get further training. So thinking about what we can do to support those kinds of initiatives also is really important.
Will you be voting on the debt ceiling sometime in the next couple of months?
Yes, we expect that to come up in September, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And what about a funding bill? Do you have to do a short-term funding bill?
I think that's not clear yet. Mm-hmm. What we are now working, as I said, one of the reasons I need to leave a little early today
Right.
is to go to the Appropriations Subcommittee budget hearing on Health and Human Services, Department of Labor and Department of Education. So we have already started the appropriations process. I'm the chair of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee in Appropriations. So we have the Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, and all of the science agencies that are part of our portfolio. And we've already started our budget hearings with most of those entities and are putting together an appropriations bill now. And I think that is true of virtually all of the appropriation subcommittees. So we're a little behind where we should be because it's a new administration and the budget was delayed coming from the president. But I think that appropriations process is going to continue. We may not get done by October 1st, but hopefully we will have only a short-term extension that we might need in order to get the budget passed.
I mean, we could spend the next 2 hours on your role in the Foreign Relations Committee on what's going on in Cuba, Haiti, Afghanistan, but we'll hold that for another, hopefully in person and not a Zoom. But I know that you've been involved in so many different issues. So I just want to, I know the time is really tight, but I just want to thank you. Unless, Emily, do you have another question?
We do have a few more if the senator has time.
Okay, I've
got about another 10 minutes. So
okay, I'm just mindful of the time. Good.
We have one, I think, playing off your comments about worker shortages and skills gaps. Are there things we can be doing to harness the power of older workers through systemizing mentorship programs?
Boy, that's a really good question. You know, when I was at the Kennedy School back in right after I left the governor's office, the dean of the Kennedy School at that time was an expert on workforce. And I can remember he had all of these graphs and charts that he showed us about what was going to happen to the workforce in this country by the late teens and early 20s, where according to his analysis, we would be relying on older workers and immigrants to help address our workforce needs. And that's exactly where we are today. We have a need for a lot of older workers, and especially as we look in New Hampshire in particular. I know Maine is the same. I'm not sure about Massachusetts, but I know in New Hampshire we have an aging population, and we have many of those workers who are retiring, but we have many who are still in the workforce, and looking at the contributions that they can make because of the experience that they have. The Small Business Administration has a great program called SCORE, which has gotten into a little bit of trouble nationally, but it's been doing very well in New Hampshire and in other New England states. And they rely on mostly retired executives and business people who come in and help entrepreneurs who are starting new businesses with helping provide guidance to them and real mentorship as they're thinking about starting their new businesses. So I think there is a huge opportunity there. The other place that has been a real challenge for us in New Hampshire this year is with the visa program. We have a lot of particularly seasonal businesses that rely on H-2B visa workers that, because of the decisions during the previous administration that have had a real impact, that have carried over, we have had real trouble getting those workers into the state. And so we have the number one concern I hear from business now in New Hampshire as I travel around is a lack of workforce. They can't find people to hire. So many of those, particularly restaurants, have had to close one day a week because they don't have enough help. It's a huge challenge, and it's one that we've got to do a better job of preparing for. I was I was at a business a couple of weeks ago talking about this issue and asking about how they were looking at addressing this. They were talking about partnering with community colleges, with high schools. We were talking about intern programs. I think we've got to think about this issue in more creative ways than we have in the past because of the challenges that we have now.
We have another about a piece of legislation that you've introduced, S499, which seems like it would significantly enhance the value of the ACA and make health insurance more affordable through revitalization of cost sharing reductions. Permanently funding the CSR program seems not only necessary due to the recent court decisions, but also wise policy. Can you speak about the need to pass 499, but also about the prospects for that bill moving forward this session?
Yeah, when I was talking about some of the significant events that had happened since I last talked to you all, I overlooked the fact that the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, which was a huge concern. And I was so relieved, as I'm sure everyone on the call was, when that happened. So now we've got assurance that we're going to continue to have this base for our healthcare needs. What we have to look at now is how we address affordability, how we address providing care to people. So we do a delivery system reform, which is one thing we were talking about way back when we passed the Affordable Care Act. We've got to talk about how we can ensure that healthcare is provided in a way that is most effective. One of the things that, as you say, I've introduced this legislation that would address the cost sharing reduction payments to try and help address affordability. In the American Rescue Plan, there were also provisions that provided additional subsidies, which is part of that legislation as well. And that passed, but only for the remainder of this year. So we've got to look at how we can continue to work to make sure that people can access healthcare in a way that's affordable and that we can support innovations. You know, I think one of the huge success stories, there weren't a lot of them during the last year and a half with COVID, but one of them was recognizing how important telehealth is and ensuring that we continue to be able to provide telehealth coverage for people. And also how creative we can get. I was up at Dartmouth Hitchcock last summer, and I had a chance to watch in real time the work that they're doing virtually with a number of smaller hospitals in New Hampshire, providing emergency room coverage. And it was just fascinating to see how they're able to provide that, to cover a need that exists and have outcomes that are better because of that. So I think it's that kind of creativity and thinking about how we can be innovative that is going to help us as we look at costs and also as we look at what we need to do to ensure people have access to healthcare. But that was the telehealth example, and audio only health, again, in New Hampshire, because we have many rural places that don't have broadband, ensuring that we can provide over the phone care for some people is also really important, and ensuring that both of those continue after this pandemic, I think, is going to be critical.
We have one more that I think is probably a quick one to wrap up with, but now that more and more Americans are vaccinated, are you seeing an uptick in tourism in New Hampshire this summer?
Well, we are. I think we are across the country. In fact, I was watching the news this morning and there was a whole piece on the increased cost of travel this summer, which is an indication that there are a lot more people doing it. I can tell you that every plane I've been on between Washington and Boston or Manchester in the last couple of months has had every seat taken. So I think that's a good sign. We're seeing people come back. But again, we need to ensure that that continues. So we need to stay ahead of vaccinations. I think it's really important for us to look at making sure that young people, once we're sure that this vaccination is safe for young people, to ensure that they're vaccinated. All of my grandchildren are now vaccinated, including the 12-year-old. And it's a real relief for me and for my family to know that they're safe because they have those vaccinations. And in fact, one is up at camp this week, and I got a great photo of the campers who are unmasked, who have been vaccinated. So that's nice to see. And I think we need to continue down that path, ensuring that we do everything we can to keep people safe. And that includes ensuring that people can get vaccinated, and that young people, as we go back to school in the fall, that young people who are able to get vaccinated are doing that, and that teachers and all of the education assistants who are part of our school systems are also vaccinated. So that's a long answer to the tourism, but hopefully it's going to continue to get better. And I know that for all of those restaurants that and venues that were hit particularly hard, hopefully some of the funding that's been out there through the Paycheck Protection Program, through the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan Program, through the new shuttered venue operating grants, are able to get help to reopen and have a good season.
Well, we want to thank you, Senator, and we want to wish you continued success in working with your colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and hopefully some very good news will be forthcoming on an agreement on the infrastructure infrastructure bill. I will only just say that hopefully we can meet in person, maybe at the BVI in the next couple of months, rather than doing a Zoom. But all in all, we want to thank you for making time available today, but also all the good work that you're doing. And we're fortunate to have you there as our advocate, and it's needed now more than ever, your service, your voice. So I just want to say thank you for all your good work, and please give our best to the Secretary of Labor. All right.
I will certainly do that, and thank you for this opportunity. And I hope that the New England Council will weigh in on these this infrastructure package as it's going through the floor, and also on how you feel about the budget resolution that's coming through. I think it's really important for us to hear from you.
Excellent opportunity for us. We appreciate it, Senator. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
All right, thank you.